So we talk a lot on our channel about how a lot of the digestive symptoms can actually be caused by a lack of stomach acid. And if that's new information for you, we'll explain how that happens in this video. But I got a great question from a viewer about why does decreasing stomach acid even more sometimes improve some of these symptoms. So in this video, I'm going to go over why these symptoms can improve if a person decreases stomach acid even more and steps they can take to improve those situations naturally. You don't want to miss this.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
So it was over on our dyspepsia and indigestion video that user 88mm something or other asked, why do you think PPIs help with dyspepsia and epigastric pain, or why are they prescribed by doctors for this disease? And just remember, I'm not a doctor. That's not really my place to talk about why those are used. That's not my job to justify those situations. But I'm going to share some studies with you and help you understand why these things can create some improvements to symptoms in some scenarios. And just remember that this is not meant for medical advice. If you need medical advice, you need to get that from your doctor. I'm just going to share some viewpoints of some information that I found when I researched this question. And a lot of people will come to us asking how to improve proper stomach acid function naturally because they're hearing all of these reports and studies about all of the harm that seems to be coming from turning off stomach acid. And you hear about things like, increased risk of bone fracture and liver disease and gastrointestinal infections. And when we look at this study over here on adverse effects associated with proton pump inhibitor use, and I'll put a link to that study in the description below this video, but we hear them say PPI use has been linked with increased risk of both incidental and recurrent Clostridium difficile infections. Acid secretion by peridial cells is an important immunological barrier in the gastrointestinal tract, which is why hypochlorhydria, which is the fancy word for a lack of stomach acid, which is why hypochlorhydria generated by the inhibition of gastric acid secretion increases the risk of bacterial colonization and altered intestinal flora and susceptibility to enteric infections. So, and that's kind of what we see too, is that if there is some kind of lack of stomach acid here and there's infections in the stomach or the small intestine, it kind of opens up the door for other bad guys to come in and say, oh, well, this is nice here. We like it. We're going to set up camp and raise some kids and we'll have a keg party. But when we look at these other things, why would PPIs cause bone fracture? Well, if you're turning off stomach acid, you need to understand why the stomach acid would be there in the first place. Like, is Mother Nature just an idiot? Why would she put that there if it wasn't really needed? So when we look at the role of HCl, it's meant to acidify the food when it comes into the stomach. So when you acidify the food, that's the first part of really breaking that food down so that we can get the nutrients out of that food. That's kind of why we eat food, is to get the nutrients from that food. So if you're not acidifying that food correctly, then you can't really break the food down enough to get all the nutrients out of that food. And the other role beyond the acidify factor is that HCl, which is hydrochloric acid that's made in the stomach, HCl is meant to cleanse the food that comes in. And all those bad guys, the bacteria and all these microorganisms that come in on the food that we're eating, are supposed to die in an acid bath in the stomach from that HCl. So if someone doesn't have enough HCl there, they're kind of leaving the front door open for all the bad guys to come in and create all kinds of havoc. And that paper that I showed you that I'll link in the description, it goes over a lot of other issues that they feel are linked to long-term PPI use, like cardiovascular issues and dementia, and you can read through that. I'm not going to get into all of that in this video because that's not what user 88mm something or other asked about. So when we're looking at gastrointestinal infections and an increase when somebody turns off stomach acid, well, that makes a little bit of sense. That makes sense to us. And a lot of these digestive symptoms that we experience come from an inability to acidify and break down that food. So when the food can't get acidified, it'll break down by process of rotting and fermenting. And that rotting and fermenting creates a lot more gases and toxic junk, and those gases create pressure either in the stomach or the intestinal tract that can create that bloating or even pain and discomfort, or indigestion and dyspepsia, all those things that can come from an inability to truly break down your food. So if we understand some of these digestive symptoms like bloating and indigestion and dyspepsia, now we can talk about why would turning off stomach acid improve those symptoms. Because we also hear from a lot of people pretty much on a daily basis. If you just check the comments in our videos, you'll hear from people that say how they improved a lot of these symptoms by increasing stomach acid and helping the body naturally create its own stomach acid so that that food can be broken down properly. But we also want to understand why would some of these symptoms improve if somebody took a PPI or some type of situation that helped them turn off that stomach acid. Because a lot of the remedies out there for things like acid reflux and bloating are just natural ways to turn off the stomach acid. Here, take some baking soda or alkalize your water and all these kind of things that just reduce that stomach acid. And a lot of those things can improve the symptom that the person is dealing with. So we want to understand why that is. So let's start with reflux. And reflux is actually a situation where a person is not making enough stomach acid. It's not caused by too much stomach acid like advertisers want us to believe, because there's this LES valve, lower esophageal sphincter, at the bottom of the esophagus that opens so food can come in. And then as we start to acidify that food, the LES's job is to close so that acid product doesn't come back up and burn us. The problem is that valve is triggered by stomach acid. So if someone's just making a little bit of stomach acid and they're not making enough, and there's a lot of reasons that someone would not be making enough stomach acid, and it's really common today. They don't even need to be taking a medication to turn off their stomach acid. There's a lot of things that can restrict that HCl production. So if somebody's just making a little bit, but it's not enough to trigger that valve to close, then the small amount that they're making is going to come back up and burn them and cause them to have reflux. So we hear from a lot of people all the time that when they increase that stomach acidity, instead of turning it off, then it's enough to trigger that valve to close, and then the stuff doesn't come back up and burn them and the reflux is gone. But if a person took steps to turn off that stomach acid completely, or maybe some type of a supplement or something to neutralize those acids, like an antacid or something, now they're turning off all the acid, so this valve is not closing correctly, but the things that are coming back up are not burning them and not causing those symptoms. Now there is a problem that there's digestive enzymes in the stomach that can still come back up, and those enzymes are made to break down proteins, and proteins are what our esophagus and all of our vocal cords and everything are made of. So I lost my voice for 8 years, and that was partially due to the fact that I didn't understand all of these things, and it took me a long time to figure that out. I'll put a link in the description below about how I fixed my 8-year laryngitis situation, so you can check that out if you want to. But for reflux, that makes sense. If you turn off all the acid so that there's no acid, yeah, you didn't fix the problem because the LES is not being triggered to close correctly, but you remove that entire symptom, and now you no longer have that symptom. And if you read the comments in our videos, you'll see a lot of people saying, oh, my doctor put me on this acid reduction medication type situation, and I really felt great for about 2 weeks. It really improved, and then I just started to seem to go downhill. And so what we want to look at is a lot of times when there isn't enough acid in the stomach, the bacteria is going to come in and set up camp, like that study helped us understand. And when the bacteria thrive in the stomach or in the small intestine, well, they put off waste. Everything that lives puts off waste, so you have these millions of little organisms pooping in your body all day long. And for a lot of these types of organisms, that waste will be alkaline. So they're even further alkalizing the stomach and making the environment more susceptible for them to thrive. So now this alkaline waste is further reducing your ability to break down your food correctly. There's more gases and junk and toxins that are being created from all of that waste, and that can create a lot of symptoms on its own. But what can really magnify those symptoms is when that alkaline waste mixes with a little bit of stomach acid. Think about that stupid volcano that we all made in the 3rd grade, where we mixed the vinegar and the baking soda and it made that fizzy mess and it came erupting back off and it's a volcano. Whee! Well, that fizzy mess is a reaction between alkaline and acid meeting together. And that shouldn't really happen in the stomach. And when that does, it creates a fizzy mess that can really magnify any type of symptoms that you're having. And remember that this stomach acid is meant to kill off that bacteria. And this bacteria puts off this small amount of waste all day long as they get rid of waste into your body. But when they die, they kind of break apart, and then all of their toxins go into your body at once. So when you're killing off this bacteria, it can create a die-off type symptom. So if someone's creating a small amount of stomach acid, it's not enough to really wipe out all that bacteria and keep them from setting up camp, but it's enough to kill some off, so that die-off is really going to magnify those symptoms, plus the acid mixing with all that alkaline waste is going to create a fizzy mess and magnify a lot of symptoms. So you come in and you turn off that small amount of acid, and you remove all the symptoms that would come off from killing off that bacteria, as well as the acid meeting the alkaline and creating a fizzy mess. So that can really reduce some symptoms. However, now you're no longer killing off any of the bacteria, and it is a party in there. And they really start to replicate more and more, and more of these bacteria or other microorganisms create more and more waste, which is more and more toxins, which can really start to elevate those symptoms. So it makes sense that someone might feel better initially and then really start to feel worse and worse. And what is happening? It can't be this medication or whatever I'm doing to turn off my stomach acid, because I felt better when I started that. So that can't be the problem. It must be something else. It must just be that my mom couldn't poop but once a month, and so it's just a genetic thing, and sorry about my luck. That's what a lot of people feel like, that they're just kind of broken, and that's how it is. But in most cases, there's malfunctions going on, and these malfunctions can be corrected. So we understand why reflux, bloating, or indigestion symptoms could improve along with this dyspepsia type stuff. Diarrhea is something else that can improve if somebody turns off their stomach acid. And there's a lot of things that can create chronic diarrhea or loose stool issues, but a very common one is poor bile flow. Bile is made by the liver, and then it's stored in the gallbladder. And then when this food is acidified, it leaves the stomach and comes here into the duodenum, and that triggers the gallbladder to squirt this alkaline bile down and neutralize all those acids. So this is where you want the alkaline meeting the acidity, is outside of the stomach, in that intestinal tract there. And the alkaline bile is what helps us do that. Now there's bicarb and other stuff that comes out of the pancreas, but the bile is the big player in neutralizing those acids. So it's very common for someone's bile not to be flowing correctly. It becomes too thick and sticky to flow, and then it can't come down and help neutralize the acids that are leaving the stomach. Even if it's just a small amount of acids, they still need to be neutralized. So when that's not happening, these acids continue out of the stomach and start going through the intestinal tract where they're not meant to be. The intestinal tract is not meant to hold acids the way that the stomach can. That'll kind of break down the lining of that intestinal tract. So the body doesn't want that, so it'll bring all the water that it can to this intestinal tract to cool things off, and then rush it out the back door, and it lifts us off the toilet like a rocket. So that's one very common cause of chronic diarrhea. And if a person took something to turn off their stomach acid, well, now the acids are not coming out here and not getting neutralized. So if there's no acids that need to be neutralized, then it doesn't matter if the bile's flowing or not. I mean, they're not digesting their food and getting all the nutrients out of their food, but at least it's not creating trouble. So when you turn this off, now if the bile is not flowing, you won't have that chronic diarrhea issue, and it'll really improve that symptom. But again, you just turned off digestion more. You were already having digestive problems where you really weren't able to get all the nutrients out of your food. Remember, for things like bone building and bone strength, the body needs nutrients. So it kind of makes sense that, well, yeah, you would have an increase in bone fractures if your body didn't have the nutrients to rebuild those structures. So we want the digestive process to work correctly so that we can get nutrients out of the food. But again, if your doctor has prescribed a PPI or something to you, this information is not telling you to just stop taking that and throw it in the trash. Whatever symptom you were having is going to come right back. And if it was acid reflux, that acid coming back up and damaging the esophagus is not something that you want. That can be a very serious situation that creates significant problems. So we like to see people fix the actual underlying cause of these problems, and then they can work with your doctor to remove the need of any medication, because now the things are working correctly, so they might not need it. Now, if you need to understand how to do that, if this is new information to you, my book, Kick Your Fat in the Nuts, chapters 3 and 4, kind of walk you through figuring out which aspects of digestion are not working correctly and steps you can take to improve that. And the book is available on Amazon, but I'll put a link in the description below where you can get that whole thing totally for free, and then you can just jump to chapters 3, and that'll kind of walk you through that process. So I hope that helps you understand those circumstances a little bit. And if you are dealing with indigestion or dyspepsia, you can jump over right now and check out that video we were talking about on dyspepsia and indigestion to gain some more insights there. I can't wait to hear about your results.